Hey, what's up guys, it's Darkroom Duels, and today we're doing a Nurse Burn deck profile. So I'm really excited with you guys because this is actually suggested to me by one of my patrons, Gloomba. And this deck is a very interesting deck that revolves around using Nurse Reficule and Bad Reaction Smochi to use cards in the deck that would normally give your opponent life points, now do burn damage, which is really amazing and a very interesting strategy for this deck to have. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of Notification Squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like getting your name to your single video, getting a signed card to mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month you're a patron, along with test hands. And definitely give Gloomba some love down in the comments down below for suggesting this really awesome deck. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Nurse Reficule. Nurse Reficule has the ability that any effect that would make your opponent gain life points inflicts the same amount of damage to them instead, which is a really good effect and is basically the entire premise of the deck, where you're using cards like your Try and Guess and even Upstart Goblin to do damage against the opponent in the form of effect damage. We then play 2 copies of Lith, Lady of Lament. Lith, Lady of Lament is really good in the deck because she has the ability that if she's normal summon, her original attack becomes 1,000, but she's not going to be on the field for very long because you can tribute her on your side of the field to be able to reveal 3 traps in your deck, and your opponent randomly picks one of them and you add it to your hand, which is a really good effect for this card to have, to be able to get into all sorts of really powerful trap cards that we might need. We then play a single copy of Dark Lord Ashel. Dark Lord Ashel is really helpful in the deck as well because if you draw into multiple copies of your Dark Lord Reficule, you can actually discard them to the graveyard with Ashel to be able to draw 2 cards. This card is a great card in the deck to be able to just give you that extra advantage that you draw into multiple copies of Banishment or multiple copies of Nurse Reficule. You can just discard them to get combo pieces that you need. So that's it for the monsters, guys. We only play the 6. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Upstart Goblin. Upstart Goblin is very good in this deck because it has the ability to draw a card and then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. But with Nurse Reficule, they lose 1,000 life points. We then play a single copy of Card of Demise. Card of Demise is very helpful in this deck because this deck is a very much normal summon your Nurse Reficule, set 5, and pass against the opponent. And then when they draw, flip all your cards face up and end the game. So this card comes in very handy to get you a little bit more advantage because it lets you draw until you have 3 cards in your hand, and also for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, your opponent takes no damage. And then during the end phase of this turn, you send your entire hand to the graveyard, which doesn't really matter because you're going to set those cards anyways. And it also has the ability you can only activate one of this card per turn, and you can't special summon during the turn you activate this card, which is not, again, that big of a deal because you're basically just normal summoning your Nurse Reficule and passing to the opponent with this deck. We're then going to be playing 3 copies of Banishment of the Dark Lord. Banishment of the Dark Lord is very good in this deck because this card basically counts as 3 more copies of Nurse Reficule, and also has the ability that you can search your copies of Ashel. Just in case you have 2 copies of Reficule in the hand, or you already have Bad Reaction to Smochi, you can basically search a copy of Ashel and get you a draw 2 off this card, thinning the deck out a little bit more so you can get to your combo pieces. We're then playing 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. This card is very good because you can banish 6 cards from your extra deck to be able to draw 2 cards, but this card is the very first card that you activate during your turn, which this card is really, really good in the deck because basically you never touch the extra deck with this deck, like ever. You don't even play enough monsters to link summon in this deck, but you're basically playing a bunch of link monsters in the extra deck because of your Try and Guess. We're then playing 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Pot of Duality is really good because it lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and add one of them to your hand, and then shuffle the rest back in the deck, getting you the exact combo piece that you need. This card is a great 3-of in this build to be able to just get those cards that you need in your hand. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Bad Reaction to Smochi. This is basically 3 more copies of Nurse Reficule because it shares the exact same ability that if a card was going to give your opponent life points, it actually inflicts points of damage to your opponent instead. So this card is a really good continuous trap card. We then play 2 copies of Trap Trick. Trap Trick turns any one of your normal trap cards that you're playing in multiples into extra copies of them, which is really good because you can manage a normal trap from the deck, except another copy of Trap Trick, and set a card with the same same name on your side of the field. And you can only activate one more trap for the rest turn, and the card you set with this card can be activated the same turn it was set, which is a pretty good effect. We then play 2 copies of Secret Barrel. Secret Barrel does about 1200 points of damage to your opponent when you activate it, because usually you're going to just immediately set this card, and then at the beginning of your opponent's turn, flip it up to do 1200 points of damage just to help you out close out games. We then play 3 copies of the Paths of Destiny. The Paths of Destiny is a really good card because it has the ability that both players toss a coin once, and if a player's result is heads, they gain 2000 life points, and if the result is tails, they take 2000 points of damage. Now, the really interesting thing is with Nurse Reficules on the field, it doesn't matter if your opponent flips a heads or a tails, they're taking 2000 points of damage, because any effect that's going to give them life points is inflicted them instead, which is really good for this deck. We're then playing 3 copies of Try and Guess. Now, this card is a very interesting card that has the ability that if each player has an extra deck, you declare one extra deck monster type between Fusion, Synchro, or XZ, and both players reveal their extra deck. And then the player who has more cards of the declared type gains 3000 life points. Now, the really interesting thing about this deck is if you know what you're playing up against, you can call the right type that your opponent is going to have more of, and we're always going to have 0 of any of those numbers because we have no monsters of those types. We only play link monsters in the extra deck, so we're never going to have a Fusion, a Synchro, or an XZ. So it's always going to result in our opponent losing 3000 life points if we know what they're playing. We then play 3 copies of Gift Card. Gift Card is a really good card because it has the ability to let your opponent gain 3000 life points, but if you have Nurse Reficule on your side of the field, they lose 3000 life points, which is really, really good for this deck. Now, the really interesting combo for this deck is if you have your copy of Nurse Reficule or Bad Reaction Smochi, you can completely close out a game with 1 copy of this, a Try and Guess, and a Paths of Destiny because it's 3, 6, 8 to be able to completely close out a game. So with just 4 cards, you can completely end a game, which is really good right after your opponent draws their first card because they'll draw and then it'll go standby phase, and then you can activate all of these cards as a chain, and it just completely ends the game, which is hilarious for this deck. We then play 2 copies of Ring of Destruction. Ring of Destruction is a really good card, but you have to watch out for its changed effect because it has the ability that during your opponent's turn, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, and then you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls whose attack is less than or equal to their life points and destroy that face-up monster. And if you do, take damage equal to the original attack and then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original damage you took. This card's really good, but you can't usually reduce your opponent's life points to 0 with this card because of its effect. And it's a really good card to play as a 2 in here because you can work with it with Trap Trick. And it's just a really good card because if you don't have your copy of Nurse Reficule, it can do quite a lot of burn damage to your opponent and get rid of a monster as a disruption card. We then play 2 copies of Blazing Mirror Force. Blazing Mirror Force is in here because with your copies of Nurse Reficule, you're only ever going to have 1 monster on the field. So your opponent's going to try and OTK you as quick as possible with this deck. So your copies of Blazing Mirror Force kind of help out with that because it has the ability that when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you destroy as many attack position monsters your opponent controls as possible. Then if you do, you take damage equal to half the combined original attack of the destroyed monster, and then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the amount that you just took. So for example, if our opponent has 8,000 attack points on their field total, then we take 4,000, and then our opponent takes 4,000. Which is a really good thing for this deck because it helps you close out games, because if you have this, a copy of Try and Guess, Gift Card on your side of the field, and your opponent puts anywhere near 4,000 attack points on the field and they attack, you can then during the main phase 2 just flip these cards and instantly win the game, which is a really interesting thing for this deck. We then play 3 copies of Magic Cylinders. Magic Cylinders will win you games. This is absolutely one of the best cards in the deck because it has the ability that when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you target that monster, negate the attack, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack. I cannot tell you how satisfying it is to be able to flip the copy of Magic Cylinders against the opponent and just end a game. It's really fun to be able to do. Nobody expects it, and it's a really good card in this deck because you can just set this card, set multiple copies of this card. They're never going to expect the second copy of this card. You never search it with Trap Trick because then they know it's there, but basically it's just a really good 3 of in the deck, because basically you're going to be able to just stop an attack and be able to also do a little bit of burn damage against the opponent. With some of your burns trap cards comboed with this card, you can completely end a game. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, keep in mind, we don't really summon from the extra deck a lot, so I kind of just put together an extra deck for you guys to see what you can play in here. Basically, you just want to play a bunch of different Link monsters in here to work with Try and Guess, because you never want to have a Fusion, a Synchro, or an XZ in the extra deck, so just play completely Link monsters, and Try and Guess is always live where your opponent's going to take 3,000. But here's my suggestion to have a toolbox extra deck for you guys. We've been playing a single copy of the Condemned Dark Lord because it does work with our Dark Lord monsters, because your copy of Reficule is a Dark Lord monster. We play 2 copies of Access Code. This could be Borrelsword, Borreload, it could be Appaloosa, it could be a Link Spider if you wanted it to be. If you were trying to look for a little bit of a budget build, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Nightmare Unicorn to spin stuff, 2 copies of IP Masquerade because you can go into Unicorn during your opponent's turn, 2 copies of Nightmare Phoenix, a single copy of Nightmare Cerberus, this is to pop spells and traps, this is to pop monsters, and then 1 each of the new Charmer cards or the Charmer Link monsters, except for the new Dark one. You can put that card in here if you want to, but this is pretty much it for the extra deck. You don't really need the extra deck at all. You could literally play 1 copy of the Condemned Dark Lord and then go. Like, that could be your extra deck. And you don't need all 15. These are basically just here to be able to have a toolbox, so you don't have to play any of these. You can play 3 copies of Link Spider, 3 copies of Link Rebo, 3 copies of Salamangreat Alamirage, 3 copies of Phoenix, 3 copies of Unicorn, and 3 copies of Access Code if you wanted to. And it would be totally fine. You could basically just run with the deck. You don't even need an extra deck. You just need 1 Link monster in your extra deck, or you need cards to be able to banish off the copies of Extravagance. That's pretty much all you need for the extra deck. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to play with. I highly recommend that if you guys have not tried Nurseburn, it's an interesting deck. I really like it. I really like the Magic Cylinders in here because Magic Cylinders has always been one of my favorite cards, and it really catches players off guard. So anyways, guys, this is Darkroom Duelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of our notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.